Hi, everyone. I'm here this week with some feedback for the research paper proposal assignment and some information on how to find books at Jacobs Library. So let's go. If you haven't done so already, please take a few minutes to read the FAQs and tips document that I posted in an announcement to your class. If you haven't done so already, I think you'll find that helpful. But this feedback that you see in front of you comes directly from the research paper proposal assignments that I just finished grading this morning. So what I did was I thought about some of the common errors and issues that I saw emerging from that assignment. And I've given you some feedback here that I think the whole class will find helpful. So I'll post this to the class as an announcement so you can get a good look at the document, but let me talk you through it first here. The first bullet point here I want to point out to everybody is that MLA format is required for the research paper, and there are several members of class who are still having issues getting that format correct. So do please be aware that your grade on the research paper could be severely affected if at this point in your college composition career, you are still unable to use proper MLA format. So I do have some reminders here in front of you about what that means. Times New Roman font, double spaced, a proper heading and header with my name spelled correctly, and a 1-inch margin on all sides of your paper. And you can refer to the IDCC style book if you need an example or more help with that. But part of what the MLA format is doing for you as a writer is establishing your credibility and establishing your trustworthiness and your ethos. So it's going to be really important that you start this research paper off right off the bat from a strong footing with correct MLA format. Next up, do keep in mind that the research paper must be based on a primary source text by the author that you have chosen to study this semester. I did have a few students in class who turned in a research paper proposal on topics that were completely outside of what we've talked about this semester, things more related to science and history and psychology. You know, not that any of those topics could not be related to your text, but it was really clear that some students kind of missed the boat that you needed to be basing the research paper on a primary text by your author. So if you need to discuss that with me, please get in touch with me soon. Next up, do be sure in your research paper that you're going to be using formal voice. I wanted to mention this because in the proposal assignment, I said it was okay to use first person, right? Because you're sort of narrating your thoughts about how you're going to proceed. But in the final draft of the research paper assignment itself, you want to use formal voice. So think about all those guidelines we've discussed: no first and second person, no contractions, no slang, especially no statements like I think, I feel, I believe. Okay, keep a sharp eye out for that. This is a piece of general writing advice I offer to writers on almost any assignment, not just on the research paper, but it certainly applies here as well. It's usually better to write deeply on a few topics than superficially about a bunch of topics. So in the research paper, for most writers, you're going to write a more effective paper if you are able to focus on 1 or 2 topics that you're developing throughout. Then some writers mentioned like 6 or 7 topics that they were going to be touching on in their paper. That's probably too many because you don't have enough space to get into them really deeply. So again, remember, it's better to write deeply on a few things than superficially about a bunch of things. This whole last section of this document here has to do with the types of sources you are using for the research paper. Now, you want to make sure that you are including at least the minimum number of sources and the correct types of sources. Now, most students on the proposal assignment had at least the right number of sources, but it was clear to me there was some confusion happening determining what type of source exactly people were looking at. So forgive me, I'm repeating a bunch of information you've read and heard from me already, and I'm going to do it again because I think it might be helpful for you. So just some hints about types of sources. The primary source is your book that was written by your selected author, and the primary source is the source around which you are building the research paper. Most of you have at least one primary source. There are a few students who are writing about series, or more than one book. So in those cases, there may be more than one, but most of you have one primary source. Now, secondary sources are the ones that we use to help us understand the primary source. So you might think about secondary sources as explaining or giving more information related to the primary source. So in addition to that one primary source, you will also include at least 5 and no more than 7 secondary sources. So total on the works cited page with primary and secondaries all together, you'll have at least 6 and no more than 8 sources. Now, popular sources such as websites, magazines, and things like that can often be very highly credible, and they can be excellent sources. But keep in mind, just because something is super credible, it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of scholarly. So let's differentiate again for ourselves the difference between these two types of sources. So popular sources, the really big difference between the two types is that popular sources are written for a general audience and scholarly sources are written by experts for experts. So that's the big difference. Now, popular sources are easy to find and locate. They often contain things like glossy pictures. Again, as I mentioned, they're written for a general audience, often by a non-expert, right? Like a journalist could write an article about pediatric cancer, but that doesn't mean that that journalist is actually an expert about it, right? They're often easy to locate and purchase, unlike scholarly sources, which are usually more difficult to find and to get a hold of. The articles are shorter, they use easier language, right? And they often don't really reference where they got their information from. And then they give us some examples of different magazines down here that are considered a popular source. Now, again, they can be fantastic, excellent sources, but there are some very clear indicators that mean something is scholarly. So when you're searching for scholarly, my first piece of advice would be to hit up our library databases. And after you conduct your search for, whatever your term is, then you can refine those results for scholarly or peer-reviewed. And again, I know that we've mentioned this before, but I wanted to just review it really quickly for you. So some of the characteristics that you'll notice about scholarly sources is, number one, as I mentioned, they're written by experts for experts. So you're going to hear a lot of scholarly language, a lot of technical language, a lot of jargon, and you will also see references. So it's very common in almost every scholarly source that you're going to be seeing citations and bibliographies and references and things like that. Scholarly sources are also almost always peer reviewed. That's one of the reasons I tell you to refine your results for scholarly or peer reviewed, because what that means is that scholarly sources go through a very rigorous and extensive publication process that many popular sources do not. So if you have any confusion about whether or not you're looking at a scholarly source, please get in touch with me, a Writing Center consultant, or a librarian at Jacobs Library, and we will be able to help you figure that out. It's not always super clear, but we'll be happy to help you figure that out. Okay, my last bullet point here is just about the secondary book source, because this can be confusing for some writers. So do keep in mind that the secondary book source, it can be a physical book or an electronic book, either way is fine, but it must be a secondary source. Did you hear me say that? It has to be a secondary source. In other words, it needs to help us better understand the primary source, okay? So you might be able to find that secondary source in Jacobs Library, right? Like out in the stacks and go pull it off the shelf. You might use the database called eBook Central to find that book source, or you might find, any book anywhere else, and another library, your own home library, wherever it might be from. But another important thing to keep in mind is that the secondary book source and the primary book source are two separate sources, okay? So just because you have that one primary source book appearing on your works cited page, that doesn't mean that you met the requirement for this secondary book source, okay? And the example I give here to kind of clarify that for you is if you had a student writer who was using The Fault in Our Stars as their primary source, that person might find a book about pediatric cancer treatment and use info from that in their paper. So you can see that the secondary source is giving us more information to help us understand the primary source. So if you have questions about any of this research aspect of the research paper, finding your sources, identifying what type of a source it is, or citing this source, please get in touch with one of those resources that I mentioned earlier. Now, we've spent some time talking about these book sources, and I've noticed that some of the students in my face-to-face class were having issues finding the book sources, and they weren't sure how to locate them using Jacobs Libraries catalog. So I just wanted to quickly remind you about how to go about doing that. So here I am on Jacobs Libraries homepage. You can find it by just going to ivcc.edu/library. And remember, here is our sort of search bar, and this is going to search all of the holdings in the entire library. Okay, so that's going to include books. So I'm going to search Stephen King. I'm going to imagine he's my author I'm studying this semester. And you can see right off the bat, we have 323 results within the library's catalog. Okay, now what I can do over on the right-hand side here is I can limit the types of resources, the types of results that I'm getting to only books. Now I have a list of all the books in the library that relate to Stephen King. Okay, whether or not they're useful is another question, right? But now I at least have a list of all these books. But let's say I'm not really finding exactly what I wanted to with these books. And, I wanted to find something a little bit more particular. I could try to do, actually, let me start over with a brand new search for Stephen King. But instead, I'm going to go into the advanced search, and I'm going to add poverty as a search item and see what comes up. So Stephen King and poverty, I've got 19,000 results, far too many to go through. So the first thing I'm going to do is come down to my resource type, and I'm going to refine this to only books that we have access to. Now we're down to 89 results, so we're getting somewhere manageable. This is the point where maybe I might go in and add a new line with another search term, or just start scrolling through the books down here to see if anything looks useful for my project. Okay. Now, keep in mind, besides the actual physical books that are in the stacks in the library, we also have a database called eBook Central. So again, if you're on the Jacobs Library homepage, simply click Research and then click the A to Z database list. It's under the E's because it's called eBook Central, obviously. And you can feel really comfortable that anything you find in here is going to be a book, right? That you can use for your research paper. So again, you might want to go through and sort of refine your search for, maybe something that was more recent, and we only want things that were published in English. And maybe we want something to do with the social sciences because we're writing about poverty. You can see right off the bat, I can sort of start refining. And maybe here I would be able to find something useful for my project. So if you have questions or need help finding or locating sources for the research paper, again, I encourage you to get in touch with me. Otherwise, just keep in mind that the research paper can feel very overwhelming, but students every semester have awesome success with it and produce fabulous work. And I have no doubt that my students in my online class and my face-to-face classes can do the same this semester. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to get in touch ahead of time and try not to procrastinate. Try to start working on the research paper now if you can, and it's going to feel much more manageable as we close out the semester together. So thanks for listening and have a great day. Bye-bye.